All right, hey Brett. So how this is going to work, this first part is going to be sort of a traditional analysis, so we can kind of look at this together. And then the second part, I'm going to hop on camera and give you some sort of summary feedback and some drills. So let's jump right in. The guy on the right here, his name's Mac O'Grady. So everything I do is centered around him or the greats such as Jack Nicklaus and others. So everything we're looking at here is coming from that perspective. So the first thing I want to point out is setup, and let's just go through this from the ground up. So notice here that Mac's right foot is slightly turned out, maybe 10 degrees or so, and then his left foot is a little more turned out, so maybe 15 degrees in the left foot. And then you notice yours are very sort of squared off or straight. So the first thing we want to do is set the feet up correctly, because the golf swing is happening on an arc. So the way you have your feet set up is going to make it difficult for you to turn around the arc properly. So we have to set the feet up properly so that the movements can correlate with this throughout the motion. So that's the first thing. I'll talk more about this on the second part. And then also you'll notice that Mac, as you kind of go up the legs, you know, he's balanced here. His legs are supporting his pelvis in an athletic way, so that the pelvis can sit sort of comfortably on top of the legs. But basically just athletic, just feeling balanced, but ready to move at the same time. You'll also notice that Mac's right hand, I'll clear these lines. When you look at Mac's right hand here, you'll see that the thumb is on the left side of the shaft. So the inner part of the right palm, or the sort of lifeline in the right palm, is covering that left thumb. And then what you'll also notice here is this right index finger. So we call this a trigger finger, and this is really important when it comes to ball striking, because it affects your ability to keep pressure on the grip, pressure on the shaft. You know, terms like lag or things like that. The ability to support the golf club is very much a part of this pressure point in the right hand. So you'll see that that sort of sets his right wrist in a little bit more on top position, where if you see here, I can see your left thumb, and then I don't really see a trigger finger, and then this V in this hand is pointing well over here, where Mac's V is pointing more sort of in between his head and shoulder there. So we can clean up the right hand grip a little bit. I'll talk more about this in part 2, but it'll just help you support the club better throughout the swing, and create more sort of retention of pressure on the shaft, because it seems like you lose a little bit of your, if you want to use the word lag, you lose some of that coming down, and it's a lot to do with this right hand grip. So on top of this, I also want to mention one thing in terms of where your head is aligned. So you'll notice here that your head is sort of tilted toward your left shoulder a little bit. And what that does is it's going to set your eye line sort of in a odd position. Because if you look at where Mac's head is aligned here and where his eyes are looking, sort of in this way. You'll see here that your head is cocked sort of to the left. So what that means is down the line, your eyes are pointing sort of out in this direction. So what that's going to do is it's going to affect your takeaway to some degree. And so what I'd like to see is, I'll talk more about this in part 2, but what I'd like to see is just the head and the neck more centered. More centered with the spine, more centered with the body, to be in a little bit more athletic, ready to move position. Because what this causes, I'll clear these lines, and I'll talk more and more about this in part 2 as a summary, but what this causes in you can see here the right hand grip very underneath, but what it causes when you have this eye line sort of, it's almost like the eyes are shifted in this direction. So what that's going to cause in your backswing is, as you take the club back, the hands, look at where, I'll put a, we can use this arrow as where your hands were at setup. And then look at how outside the hands go from where they were at setup. And so your arms are already sort of detaching from your body here. And that's going to cause some inconsistencies because the arms disengage from the body too much. In this way, it's going to be hard to sequence the arms and the body together. Okay, so a lot of this, I think, is set up because your eye line's in that direction. So if you think of a parallel hand path to your eye line, kind of causes the takeaway to get outside and picked up. Okay, so we'll clean up setup. If I quote Nicklaus, a well-struck shot is 40% setup, 50% a mental image of the shot he wants to create, and 10% swing. So a lot of what we see as swing flaws are sort of setup flaws that are disguised as swing flaws. So now I'd like to look at, so we'll work on the setup, we'll clean up the setup, then we'll work on the takeaway a little bit. I'd like to point out, face on, that Mac's right knee is in a little bit stronger position. And I think when you turn your right foot out a little more, like Mac has it, your right knee is going to be in a stronger spot. But what I want to look at is, as you draw this up to the top, club gets kind of rolled and picked up. And then notice how much this knee is sort of locking out on you, causing you to sort of reverse pivot a little bit. But you notice where that knee is. Now notice Mac's right knee. Okay, so because this foot was turned out properly, he was able to move back and around into this right hip better. So it's how the hips pivot. So you notice where his belt buckle is pointing is sort of off in this direction now, where yours is more kind of right here. And I think part of this is because of how your right knee's set up. It's kind of restricting your hip turn to the top of the backswing. So you can't quite use the ground for leverage the way that Mac's using it here. So as you set up better, as you set the feet up better, then as you wind the backswing up a little bit differently, it's going to increase your hip turn. so that your shoulders and arms can get wound up a little better, a little higher. Because as this sort of releases back more, the hands are going to travel further up in that direction. But ultimately, it's just going to create more of an athletic feel for you and more of an athletic sort of piece of leverage to the top of the backswing. So for right now, I'd like to just look at how we clean up setup, how we make sure that the setup is just rock solid, fundamental, just clean, athletic, ready. Then I'm going to give you some visuals to work on the takeaway so that we can start to, with a cleaner setup, take the club back a little bit differently. And then if we get the takeaway right, we can also get how we pivot in our hips to the top of the backswing correct. And I think that'll be enough feels for right now to sort of give you something to play around with for the next week or two of sort of, okay, what is this backswing really supposed to feel like? Because, you know, when I show, you know, I mentioned how Mac's eyes are aligned, and then how your club gets sort of picked up and outside. So those hands moved from here to here, away from you. So now notice where Mac's hands are and how the hands are able to travel straight back or even a little in to this spot here. So he hasn't lost pressure in this left pec and this left armpit, where your arms are starting to run away from you already. So we'll work on setup, we'll work on the takeaway. I'll give you some drills to feel the takeaway, some drills to feel the top of the backswing, and then we'll build it from there. So I appreciate you sending these, and I look forward to part 2.